When you read them for the first time, you're like, whoa, right? Your antenna's going to go up. And you're like, that's an amazing question. That's a deep question. That's a powerful question. I tell my clients all the time, become a question collector. Hello and welcome to conversation number 2 of Conversations of Excellence, where we are focused on just that, everything excellence. I'm going to do my very best, and the folks that I invite on are going to do their very best to cut the fat and serve to you on the silver platter. What is it that allows people to really live and lead with excellence? And I want to jump right into it today with you. I have one of my most favorite people in the world. You know, these conversations of excellence are, in a sense, a playground for me, so to speak. I love talking everything growth, and I love connecting with amazing, dynamic, versatile people. And my guest today certainly fits that mold. Not only is he dynamic, not only is he versatile, but he's also one of my best friends. You know, and here's a guy that, 7-8 years ago, I didn't even know. We met getting certified as high performance coaches, and we hit it off, and we've become very, very close friends since. We call each other brothers. But more importantly than all of that, for you today, we're going to share with you some really, really amazing insights on how can you live and lead with a higher level of excellence in your life right now. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce to you one of my best friends. His name is Jeffrey Watts. Jeffrey, how are you doing today, brother?
I am excited to be here with you today.
Yeah, me too. For all of our guests, I send them the same question. I said, hey, if we're having a conversation of excellence, which is exactly what we're doing, what are 3 things that have to be a part of that conversation? And it's amazing because, excellence, first and foremost, it's in the eye of the beholder, right? Everybody has a unique definition for it. But if everybody has a unique definition for it, then you'd imagine everybody's got a different idea of what makes it up. And when Jeffrey sent me his ideas of what he felt like needed to be included in this conversation, I said, yeah, sign me up for that conversation. We're going to jump right into that in a second. I do want to allow you to just get to know Jeffrey a little bit here. And I'm going to start with what I believe to be a unique question. Typically we ask, hey, Jeffrey, tell us what you do. But Jeffrey, instead of starting with what you do, why don't you share with us, why do you do what you do? Why?
Well, Pete, first off, thank you. It's great to be here with you. And through the years that we've known each other, we've had a lot of conversations of excellence and on excellence. So this is just kind of a continuation of the relationship that we have. And so it's exciting to get this out and to invite some other people in on some of the dynamic conversations that we've had in the past. But it's really easy for me when you say, why do I do what I do? It's for impact. And I'll tell you what I really mean by that is that I feel that it is my duty to share my gifts, talents, and abilities that God has given me and to serve others with that. And so it's an impact on their life. Specifically, I'm always looking to impact the lives of business owners and executives. And it's my privilege and honor to impact them. And then as their leadership increases, as their courage increases, as their focus, clarity increases, that's passed on through their organization. It's passed on through their family. It's passed on through their community. And so what I have found, and it's really been my privilege, is to serve those leaders. So by serving hundreds, I get to impact tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of lives, because those leaders are being released into their giftedness, into their greatness. And so it's kind of my legacy, if you will, is that I get to speak truth into their lives and to help them catch a vision for what's possible. And then I get to sit back and watch them change the world. And so it's an amazing life to be able to do something like that.
It's amazing. You're not kidding. It's amazing. I think that's why you and I get along so well, because we have similar whys, we have similar missions, share similar aspirations. And, for those of you listening today, most of which I'm sure you've probably heard of the book Start With Why by Simon Sinek. I was running a mastermind once and everybody was meeting each other for the first time. And I said, okay, share your name. And instead of saying what you do, share why you do it, right? So everybody went around the room and everybody shared why they did what they did. And sure enough, by the time we got around the room, you could tell that everybody was sort of at the edge of their seat to say, well, what do you do? It really pays credence to Simon Sinek's idea of starting with why. Typically, we introduce ourselves, we say what we do, and immediately the other person sort of kind of putting you in their box as they've experienced to their life. Oh, well, you're an accountant, so you do this. But when you lead with why, I think there's more of that human connective tissue. And I think it sets itself up for a better connection. And so for all of our guests, we're always going to ask them to share, why do you do what you do?
You did promise to cut through the fluff. No elevator pitches here. This is straight to the why, straight to the core of the matter.
We're getting right into it. I'm sure your Aunt Shirley is a fantastic person, but we don't want to hear about her today, okay? We want to get right to the excellence, right to the good stuff. For those of you curious, Jeffrey will share at the end of today's show how you can get in contact with him if you find what he shares insightful. If you want to get to know or meet Jeffrey, he'll share how you can do that at the end of today's show. But Jeffrey is an executive mentor and a business accelerator, and I feel like that does so little to really capture his true impact. He's a man of incredible experience, incredible integrity, incredible excellence, his zone of genius. And the things that he's able to do, the things that he's done for me as a mentor, as an advisor, as a coach, as a consultant, has been absolutely amazing. So I am excited to introduce Jeffrey more to you today. Hey, Jeffrey, do me a favor.
Sure.
I'm going to ask you 2 questions to sort of get us going here today. We're right at about midpoint of the year. What are you most grateful for this year?
It's interesting you ask that question because one of my core values is what I'm going to share with you, and it's come into even more focus this year as we've gone through all these lockdowns and everything that we've all experienced over the last year or so. It's freedom. I'm really grateful for freedom. You know, we all have a concept of what freedom is, and maybe it's a feeling or it's a concept, but you know, when freedom is taken away, all of a sudden it comes into real focus. And this year I've really felt that there's been a war of either taking that freedom away or giving that freedom back. And so I've just come to a greater appreciation and maybe even more passionate, you know, about protecting this freedom that we have. And we are blessed. We happen to be here in the U.S. and we still have freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom to be who we are, freedom to live in our own greatness, freedom to engage and freedom to worship and freedom to connect with people. Even though we do it over Zoom a lot now, we're still connecting and we have those freedoms. At least individually, we're not being censored yet. So I'm grateful for the freedom we have. And I'm also passionate about protecting that freedom because it is so valuable to each of us personally, but even for what we do as professionals, having the freedom to impact others is something I'm truly grateful for.
I love that. I think it's a great reminder for everybody today as well. It's interesting, things that sort of can be easily overlooked or that we may take for granted, that might be somebody's only wish, is to have a greater sense of freedom. So I love that you started today's discussion or today's conversation with that. Question 2 of 2, share with me, what are you most excited about right now? What are you working on? What are you working toward? What are you most excited about right now?
Wow, you know, I'll tell you what I'm working on right now that I'm super stoked about. And that is that I am revamping my Acceleration Summit. And my private clients, you know, come in, spend a day with me, and we really get to change their world and change their reality all at once in a single day. And they're very impactful. But with all the new science that come into play, everything we know about mindfulness and positive psychology, there's ways to increase impact. There's ways to accelerate and speed up the change, to really incorporate and internalize the work that we're doing in a way that makes it more permanent. So I'm in the process right now of kind of taking the latest, greatest and adding that in to my Acceleration Summit. I think about it when I'm going to bed at night. I wake up thinking about it in the morning. I'm sure I'm dreaming about it. That's truly front and center of what I'm working on right now. And it's just exciting to see it all come together. And quite frankly, I think it's going to be exciting for as far as the impact that it has my private clients to get to come in and work one-on-one with me. So yeah, my Acceleration Summit is front and center right now.
Very cool. Now, for those of you who are listening, whether I'm doing a conversation of excellence as I am today with Jeffrey, or I'm working one-on-one with a client, I always start with those same 2 questions. Hey, share with me one thing you're grateful for and share with me one thing you're excited about. Here's the thought behind that and my encouragement to implement that in your day-to-day. If at every major turn of your life, right, whether it's yearly, quarterly, monthly, weekly, daily, even daily, if you can find yourself somewhere between gratitude, grateful for where you are, and anticipation and excitement for where you're going, you're going to find yourself in a good place of life. You're going to live a good life. And I think it's important to think about that, right? It's important if you want to create greater abundance in your life. We're all trying to create greater abundance in our lives, whether that's money or career-wise or spirituality or knowledge or wisdom or love or intimacy. We're all trying to generate greater abundance. And I think in order to generate greater abundance, it's important to acknowledge, really get aware, and really celebrate the abundance that already exists. And I think in that question, I always start the conversation, hey, share with me one thing you're grateful for. And then that second question, hey, what are you excited about? Right? What are you excited about? I think that's something that you want to think about daily as well, because when you're not clear, when you can't answer that question like, hey, I'm glad you asked, here's what I'm excited about, then I think we're going our day to day without that all important element of anticipation. Anticipation being such a powerful force. So again, gratitude, excitement, good place to find yourself nestled somewhere in between that at every major turn of your life. So Jeffrey, I appreciate you sharing your responses to those questions with us. Now, as I said, before we do our conversation of excellence, I reach out to our guest, in this case today, Jeffrey. I say, Jeffrey, if we're having a conversation of excellence, what are 3 things that have to be a part of that conversation? And Jeffrey shared with me full engagement. He shared with me habits, number 2. And number 3, he shared with me zone of genius. So I'm so excited to start to dissect this and get a clear idea as to why are these so important to Jeffrey? How is he using them? So Jeffrey, we're going to start with your first response. You mentioned this idea of full engagement. Tell us a little bit more about, what that means.
Well, when you think about excellence, you have to be present. Excellence is not just something that happens. It's something that happens with intention. It doesn't happen on its own. And so your level of engagement, I think, has to be at the highest levels that you can generate in that moment. When I'm saying being present, it's being in the now. I'm not thinking about the past. I'm not concerned about what's gone wrong. I'm looking at now and how can we go from now to closer to what that person really has intended, set the intention to be in the future, or to be, to have, to create, whatever that may be. So being present, also tied with that in full engagement, I think, is courage. Engagement is action. It's not just a state of being as much as you are fully integrated and moving and aware. You're taking all this data and this input and bringing it to bear and gaining greater levels of clarity. And all of that is action. One of my favorite quotes, and I say it all the time because it's so true, but nothing happens until something moves. I think full engagement is an action. Yes, it's an intention, but I am present. I'm listening to you. I'm focused on you. I am bringing all of my knowledge and my experience and my intuition to bear, but it's being brought into this moment right now. And so that's why I think engagement is such a key part of excellence, because if I'm not connected, I don't believe that I can truly perform at my highest levels and bringing the best of me to bear, which I think is excellence, right? And so that's why I talk about engagement. Tell me what you think, because you're the expert in this field.
When you said full engagement, I bubbled over, and I'll tell you why. It's something I share with you all the time, Jeffrey, and it's something that we've heard, and it's one thing to hear something conceptually, but when you can really internalize it, or you can implement it, or you actually see it play out, you're like, okay, now you make a little bit more of a visceral connection to that. One thing we've heard a lot, so in the concept, is the greatest gift that you can give to another human being is your attention, right? The greatest gift that you can give to someone else is your attention. We're starving for meaningful connection. We're starving for attention. Now, you've likely heard something to that tune before. Here's what I think is amazing about that. I'd say this is maybe 6 years ago. I'm sitting around a dinner table with a bunch of my friends, right? A bunch of my buddies, their wives. We're having a great conversation. Now, I happen to, at that moment, be speaking with one of my buddies' wives, and she's telling me a story, something that was clearly meaningful to her, and I'm there. I'm engaged with her. She stops midway through her story. Again, it's just her and I one-to-one. She says, Pete, I have to tell you, when I'm speaking with you, you make me feel like I'm the most important person in the world. You make me feel like you have nowhere else to be but with me in this moment. And she said, I just wanted to tell you, I really appreciate that. And I completely played it cool and played it off like, yeah, are you kidding me, Christina? No problem, And while my attention was a gift to her, her acknowledging that was certainly a gift to me. I mean, it absolutely lit me up. And again, we hear things conceptually, but when you're able to be more diligent, more deliberate with implementing it, and then when it's reinforced, you really start to understand just how powerful that can be. So for me personally, one of my biggest pet peeves is when I'm speaking with someone one-to-one and they're looking at their phone and they're looking at this and they're looking over here and they're looking over there. And because I feel like there isn't a level of engagement. I feel like it sort of minimizes the significance of the moment that we're in together. Now, on the flip side of that, there's nothing that I appreciate more. That's why I love you, Jeffrey. When I'm speaking with someone and they're locked in and they are fully engaged, because you feel that, you sense that. And what's amazing, and I'd kick it back over to you here, Jeffrey, and get deeper on why is this so meaningful to you. Guess what? I have a 3.5-year-old and a 2-year-old. They sense and feel that as well. How many parents out there have been guilty, right? You're there with your kids, but maybe you're doing something else. Maybe you're multitasking. Guess what? My 3.5-year-old and my 2-year-old know when daddy is fully engaged and when he's just kind of there. And so, for those of us who think we could kind of put on that facade and, we're able to multitask and still give the impression that we're listening and that we're there, we're not as good as we think we are. I will say that because I couldn't even slip it past my 3.5-year-old or my 2-year-old. So very meaningful topic to me. I think it's very important. I think it's a lost art, or it's becoming more of a lost art. So Jeffrey, you told us sort of why you felt like full engagement needs to be part of the excellence equation, generally speaking. Why is it so meaningful to you specifically?
I love your analogy with your kids because I think there's a 3-year-old inside of all of us that knows if someone's paying attention or not. I don't think that ever goes away. And, today with all the distractions of the cell phone and the notifications on your email and all the other things that are going on, how many times have I been in a Zoom meeting lately? And it's obvious that they're there because they need to be, not because they want to be. And so they're not engaged or they're doing something else. You can see them writing or anyway, if we're going to have impact is about relationships. And so if I value you as a person, then my duty or my response needs to be fully present. That I'm here, that I'm listening, that I'm engaged, that what you say and do matters to me, right? And I don't have to agree. I disagree with people all the time and them with me. I love that dialogue back and forth. But you know what? You can get away with that and you can speak a lot of truth and sometimes naked truth, right? Just really kind of harsh with some sharp edges on it. But if you're fully engaged, there's a dialogue there where we both walk away better than when we started the conversation. And that's really the essence of full engagement. There's been many times in my own life, from when I was a little kid, growing up through high school, whatever, I didn't necessarily feel like people engaged with me very often. And I'm not going to go into that whole story, but the reality is I think that created in me that desire to give others what I didn't receive. And so I'm just a lot more sensitive to people having my full attention. Really knowing that I'm on their side, that I'm for them and not against them, that I only want what's their very, very best for them. And I think clients that work with both of us, they feel that because they know we're engaged, we're connected, we're relating to them on a level that is uncommon typically in their lives. Just like your friend's wife, that was not the norm for her. That's why it stood out so strongly, right? And that's something that's a lost art. And I would say that since we both work with leaders, what an important skill for a leader to have. If you really want to change your employees, your associates, your coworkers, your business, learn to connect on another level. Just that can revolutionize an entire company. And, much less talking about engagement with your customers, because ultimately whoever you're selling to, they want to know that you're engaged, that you're providing a product or a service that they really want. And are you listening to me? Do you have R&D that's continually and never-ending improvement process to make sure that you continue to deliver what they want? I just don't think there's any substitute at all when you realize that the only thing that's eternal in this life is relationships. Nothing else really matters, whether it's a relationship with our loved ones, our spouses, our friends, our kids. Either we engage or we live a life that's kind of lonely and isolated, ineffectual. And, I'll choose the richness of engagement every day.
Safe to say the idea of fake it till you make it doesn't apply here. You can't fake engagement. You can't. And I think, again, going back to what we said earlier, some folks think they're better and can sell it than they really are. And, one thing in working with leaders, you mentioned working with leaders, I think behaviors travel, right? Sometimes we try and compartmentalize our lives, like this is husband me, and this is father me, and this is business owner me, this is leader me, this is out in the community me, this is health me. But I think at the end of the day, it's you. And I think especially at a habit level, which is where we're going to next, at a behavior level, behaviors travel. So you mentioned before the leader with his team or the individual with his clients. What about the leader with his wife? What about the leader with her wife, right? What about the leader with their kids, his or her kids? Engagement travels. So I guess my question for you in wrapping up engagement as we move on to habits, how do you put this to work for you? So I'm sure folks listening today understand, especially with what we've shared, the value of full engagement. Is there something that you do, or is there a habit or a practice or an idea or an insight that folks can transition from the concept of this into the application? How do you put this to work?
I don't know that I've formulated it, but I'll give you some of my ideas on it. I think it really starts for me, I focus on a person's eyes. And I've just trained myself to do that, to make sure that I am paying attention and I'm engaged. So I'm not looking away. I'm not, distracted. Distractions, we touched on that, but the reality is that all of us have to work very hard at limiting distractions so that we can engage, right? Because the world is trying to have us disengage, if I can put it that way, or they're at least trying to steal our intention to have some lower level of connection with their product, their app, their message. When we're with people, we need to be there. So I really work on focusing on the eyes. The other thing that we've touched on is courage. And I just continually remind myself to get out of my comfort zone. There's persons out there that they just love to always interact and engage. I can tend to be more reserved at times. And so for me, sometimes it really is an act of courage when I'm engaged to speak truth or to share my opinion when it's counter to what the other person is sharing or whatever the case is, and to do that in love and with respect, right? Because again, if we're connected, then a much more meaningful exchange can occur, right? And it is an exchange. It's a give and a take. And so for me, it's tapping into that focus. It's the courage that's behind that to get out of my comfort zone and to be in someone else's world and out of my own head. I think those are the two big things for me, Pete. Again, I don't have some A plus B equals C formula for that. But I know for me, it starts with that intention. And if I value you, like I do you, when we're together, why would I not want to give you my attention, right? Because I care about you. You're one of my best friends. I want the best for you. I want you to have a dynamic future. I want whatever you're dreaming about to come true. When I come into a relationship with those intentions, it's easy to engage. If I'm coming in thinking about whatever's going on in my life, or if I'm thinking about what's wrong instead of what could be and what's right, those get in the way. It may be too simplistic, but you think about when I first met my wife, we were dating and we had those long conversations, over drinks or coffee or whatever, and you could just talk for hours or whatever. There was never a time when I'm looking around the room or I'm checking my phone that was engagement, right? And let's face it, that level of engagement deepened the relationship and allowed it to become something that was, incredibly enriching and dynamic in the relationship we have today. So intention, focus, courage. I think those are keys to engagement.
I'm going to add one quick idea, one resource. We're going to transition into habits. Almost everything excellence related for me comes back to clarity. I think when you're really clear on what it is that you want and what's meaningful to you in your personal and professional life, you're more likely to put yourself in situations, circumstances, more likely. It's not an absolute, but more likely to put yourself in situations and circumstances where if something's meaningful to you, then the likelihood of you being more engaged is obviously going to go up as well. And so I think If we find ourselves in too many environments, circumstances, situations where things feel drib or not really meaningful, I think it's incumbent upon you to be a good human being and still to be fully present and engaged while you're there. But then when you pull back later that evening or the next morning, really starting to reevaluate. Where are you showing up? How are you showing up? And if you're not showing up with that level of zest, enthusiasm, engagement, it's likely because it's not as meaningful to you or as compelling to you. So I think we can sort of help ourselves in terms of our level of engagement by surrounding ourselves with people, ideas, insights, opportunities that are meaningful to us. I know that's something that has absolutely done wonders for me. And one pet peeve, and I've already shared one, I didn't think I'd ever share two pet peeves in one show, but when people are just outwardly disrespectful to other people, even if I'm the one who's not involved in that particular social engagement, I feel that secondhand horribleness, not even embarrassment, horribleness. We all find ourselves speaking in conversations with people where in the back of your mind, like, this is probably not, whom I'm wanting to connect with. And that's okay. That happens. But I think in the essence of humility, integrity, just being a good human being, still show up, be engaged, be present. If after that conversation or circumstance ends, you say to yourself, probably not one that I'm excited to get back into, you make the changes accordingly. That's something that's a huge pet peeve of mine because you could see it, you can sense it, the person can sense it as well. That to me usually puts me off. Listen, I love leaders. We work with leaders. Jeffrey's a leader. I'm a leader. We're all leaders in our own right. I see, maybe because leaders are busy or because they've achieved a certain level of success, and in the name of efficiency, sometimes they can be very short. And so that's maybe a whole nother conversation, Jeffrey. When we're talking with leaders, right? We've got to be efficient. We've got a lot going on. But in the essence of engagement with what we're talking about, that shortness and abruptness, I think there's a sweet spot that you got to navigate. You got to explore. You got to discover if you're an open and willing leader, which I'd imagine if you're listening to this today, you are. One quick resource, The Power of Full Engagement is a book by Jim Lohr and Tony Schwartz. This is a book I've read within the past year. One of my favorites. So you talk about a resource relative to engagement. They really come at it from every angle imaginable. The Power of Full Engagement. I would certainly pick that book up. I think it's fantastic.
Pete, if I can underline the conversation you just had about clarity and the brevity or the shortness that sometimes can happen when people are busy and they have a to-do list and they're trying to check things off. And when you have that list that you're trying to make sure you get it all ticked off by the end of the day, people are not things on a to-do list, right? I just want to make sure that people understand you don't manage people, you lead people, you manage things. Leave the things on your to-do list, but when it comes to people and that clarity and that connection, that can't be rushed, and sometimes it comes quickly and sometimes it takes a while. You have to be committed. If you have that intention and that clarity to value that person and to get the greatest amount of clarity so that moving forward, we're moving in the same direction together, that we're in tandem, that we're able to cooperate arm in arm, move the company forward or move a project or an objective forward. Recently I was on the West Coast with a client. And I was out there for a week. And I had my agenda all laid out of everything I wanted to cover every day. And we actually spent the first 2 days, entire days, just gaining clarity. And I kept having this thing come up inside me where I'm going, hey, right now I should have already been on point 5 on my list of my agenda. What took precedence? Because I was present, I was engaged, is I understood that we weren't at a level of clarity that we needed yet to move this entire project forward. And so we dug in and we kept digging and digging, peeling back the onion until we got the level of clarity that we needed. Then the amazing thing happened is that all the rest of those dominoes, that I had lined up of everything for the week, they just started to fall. And it all came from 2 days of clarity. So I just want to highlight, underscore, circle in red that their clarity is key.
Regardless of the guest, regardless of what we're talking about, I can't imagine that there is anything where a higher level of clarity would not help tremendously. Case in point, we're talking about engagement, clarity being something that can certainly help with that. So that's great stuff. Jeffrey, we're going to move into your second idea or the second thing that you feel is an absolute must when we're talking about excellence, and that's habits. We've all heard of habits. We all understand, I think, conceptually the idea of why habits are as important as they are. Why, when you fielded this question for me, I said, what must be included in a conversation of excellence? You thought habits had to be one of the three. Talk to me a little bit about what it means to you here.
Well, we talk about high performance habits and productivity habits and hacks and all these things. There's a lot of buzzwords out there. We've been to the seminars, we've done the trainings, we've read the books. But I think that excellence, again, is something that happens with intention. And so if we are going to perform at the highest levels over an extended period of time, so we're talking about high performance, not just peak performance, not just blips of greatness in this life that we have, but we're wanting to perform above standard norms over the long term. That requires that you do some things to make that habitual. And so how are you de-stressing? How are you recovering? How are you gaining the clarity of what it is that you need to focus on this day, this week, this month, this quarter, this year? Covey talked about the big rocks. What are those big rocks that you're focused on, that you're going after? Well, there's a process behind all of that. And we need to have habits that allow us to consistently focus on those things. When I think about excellence, if I'm stressed out, I'm not able to deliver the highest level of excellence. If I'm emotionally distraught or distracted, things are just, there's the weight of the world is on my shoulders, I'm not able to perform at my highest levels. If my day is just consumed with meeting after meeting after meeting and people barging in and needing this and needing that and all these distractions and phone calls and emails, and hey, all of us that are busy, we know all the things that happen, right? If I don't have habits and ways to control and create my environment in a way that can be more predictable, I don't believe I'm able to perform at my highest levels. And so excellence mandates that I have habits in place. So, starting with, how do you start your day? What is that time of prayer, meditation, focusing, knowing what it is that I have set out to accomplish for the day? For me, it's what I call my one big thing time block in the morning. So I know what is the one big thing that I am going to accomplish today. And I religiously guard that time for me to work on that. Because I know that later on in the afternoon, as other people's priorities come into play and I need to engage at different levels with different people, that's a different level of focus and I'm a little more divided. I want to make sure habitually, right, that time is scheduled in there and I protect it so that I can always feel as though I am putting my best foot forward, that I can bring everything, all of my experiences, my talents, my abilities, my skills, my intuitions, all to bear in that moment to create the greatest product, service, whatever it may be. There's those habits, and then there's also just the habits of having feedback loops. How did I do today? How did I do this week? Where did I miss the mark? Because excellence is you're always striving, if you will. And I don't want to be careful with that word because some people are so driven that becomes their focus. So it's not about being driven as much as having that clarity of, am I achieving what I set out to achieve? How do I adjust, adapt, pivot, modify so that tomorrow I get even closer to the mark than I was today? Those kinds of feedback loops, again, that's part of practice, not perfection. I don't ever worry about perfection. I know my natural tendencies are toward perfection, and I diligently work to kind of push that aside and go, did I perform the very best that I could today? Given everything that's gone on, did I put my best forward today? And if I did, then when I lay my head on the pillow at night, I can sleep with a clear conscience. I know that I did everything possible that I could do this day. And there's an integrity in that. And so when we're consistent, when we have that integrity, I can keep adding to my list of things that are a part of excellence. And integrity is certainly part of that. But there's a personal integrity of, I made a commitment. I delivered on that commitment. When I go to bed tonight, I know that I did everything I possibly could today to impact others, to change lives, to live my mission. And so that's what I mean by habits. Sorry, I went on a little long there, but.
No, I think it's so relevant. It's all good stuff. When you'd sent me your response and it said habits, immediately I see habits. It's a word we see often, especially in our space. And I immediately think consistency. I think the two are almost synonymous. If you're doing something habitually, that means you're doing it consistently. And I think consistency or a lack of consistency is what I see to be the biggest challenge of the folks that I work with. I don't know if you'd agree, but because here's the deal. We get to a certain level of our lives, right? Whether we're talking about our health, mentally, spiritually, physically, whether we're talking about our relationships, personal relationships, family relationships, friendship relationships, or work relationships, or whether we're talking about the growth of our business, we get to a point in our lives where we all know what we ought to do, right? It's not the not knowing. I notice, especially the people that I work with, it's not that they don't know per se. It's that they struggle with doing it with any level of consistency. And I think more times than not, the reason why it's so challenging to build a constructive habit, a habit that we know is going to produce favorable results, is because we're so overwhelmed. We've got so much going on. And that's why I think for anybody listening today, here's an exercise that I did for myself. So simple, so quick. And to this day, it still has been so powerful and impactful for me. And here it is. If you look at your life, you break it into three arenas. Health. And when I say health, all related, spiritually, mentally, physically, emotionally. Relationships, all relationships. And then your business or however you generate wealth. The idea that I have is there are but a few key drivers that make all the difference in the world. How clear are you on what they are? And how committed are you to their consistent execution? Right? There are but a few key drivers. I don't care what we're talking. We're talking about health. We'll talk about relationships. We'll talk about generating wealth. We'll talk about building your business. We'll talk about skiing. We'll talk about investing. We'll talk about parenting. Anything we talk about, there are but a few key drivers that make all the difference in the world. How clear are you on what they are? And how committed are you to their consistent execution? And what I noticed for myself first and what I'm noticing with clients is, again, coming back to that word of clarity, there isn't that level of certainty, clarity, matter of factness of, hey, these are the three things relative to my health. These are the three things or the five things relative to my relationships. These are the things relative to my business, right? So I'll just give you one example, my health. I say to myself, if I'm speaking about my holistic, comprehensive health, PM full, evening routine. AM sharp means I treat my morning routine with some level of sacredness. I'm very deliberate with what I do in the morning. Eat clean, exercise with intensity, and mindful breaks, making certain that I'm implementing mindful breaks into the scope of my day. So I identified 5 key behaviors, key habits that make all the difference in the world for me as it relates to my health. I've eliminated any uncertainty as to how do I arrive at a place of great health. It's those 5 things. So with that clarity, it has helped my consistency tremendously. So I think when you talk about habits, if you're not as consistent as you'd like to be, don't beat yourself up. Ask yourself, how clear are you on what it is that you want to be more consistent with? Start with clarity. And from there, since we are there, I'll share 2 very quick things. Now, once you're clear on your behaviors, once you're clear on your habits for whatever it's health, relationships, whatever we're talking about, now you want to talk about some level of accountability, personal accountability, social accountability. For personal accountability, I have a scorecard. As a matter of fact, I have it right here. You won't be able to see it too well, but I have an actual scorecard where I am constantly measuring my key behaviors and my key habits. If you're regularly self-monitoring, which is what this scorecard does, you're 2.5 times more likely to stay consistent. So there's my personal accountability. I have a scorecard of my key behaviors. For social accountability, I speak with the likes of Jeffrey every week. I speak with 2 other guys and gals every week. The reason why there is, well, there's some social accountability there. If I tell Jeffrey this week, hey, I'm going to do this, and next week I don't do it, right? It adds a little bit more skin in the game, adds a little bit more accountability. So those are a couple ideas, some applicable practices that I think you can play around with and ideate on today, and I think they'll serve you tremendously. Jeffrey, I know I said a mouthful. Was there anything that I said that you feel like I left out or anything that you want to expound upon?
Well, Look, I'm surprised you haven't brought in any sports analogies because you are the pro at sports analogies. So I'm going to tread on your territory a little bit. But when you think about that consistency in excellence, whether it's a golfer and they're hitting 100 putts and 100 drives a day, or, how many times have you heard of the pro basketball player that's, they shoot 500 foul shots a day, and it's day after day after day after day. It's part of their excellence practice. And they understand that practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent. And so they're looking at the fundamentals. They're making sure that their form is proper. And so that when it's time to perform, they really can deliver at the highest levels. One of my favorite stories, and you probably know this one, is with Jerry Rice. And, they'd be in practice and he'd go out, he'd run a passer out, he'd catch the ball, and he'd run all the way to the end zone. And people would go, what are you doing, man? Why do you do that every time? And it was part of his mental practice because he saw himself always catching that ball and taking it to the house, all the way into the end zone. Think about what that mindset that was there when it came to game day, when he had to deliver. Every time, he's not thinking about what he can't do. He's thinking about what he can do. And that's such a part of delivering in excellence. And yes, it's an attitude, but see, it's a commitment to those fundamentals. As we were talking about with habits and the consistency, that's a commitment. It doesn't come easy. And I will tell you, it's not easy for me. It's not easy for me. But I know that if I want to live an excellent life, if I want to have excellent results, if I want to have excellent impact, then I don't have an option. Because there's really no substitute for that. There's no shortcut. At least I haven't found it yet. What's your experience?
I think you're spot on. I love the parallel to sports. You know that sports has been a huge part of my life, is a big part of my life. And I think there's such great parallels to sports. I mean, the bottom line is you sent over habit, and I thought consistency, number one, as I shared. And I also thought about that Aristotle quote or Will Durant. I don't know who it's credited to, but we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Excellence is not an act, but a habit. We are what we repeatedly do. So listen, again, if you're a baseball player, if you're a football player, if you're a manager, if you're a leader, if you're a mom, if you're a dad, if you're a husband, if you're a wife, if you're a friend, whatever you are, excellence is not an act, it's a habit. And so that's why I think it's so important, whatever arenas are important to you in your life, your spirituality, your mindset, your physical health, your business, your relationships, I think it's so important to get clear on, hey, what are those 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 things, those key drivers that, assuming I commit to, make all the difference in the world. Again, I think clarity is so important here.
And Pete, I have to throw in one thing real quick, and that is, don't overwhelm yourself. To whoever's watching this, pick one area. Do one thing consistently. And what will happen is you'll see the results, and then it'll motivate you to do the next one and the next one. So often people feel like, well, gosh, where do I start? You start with one.
Love that.
It's that easy, right?
Great reminder. What happens if you, oh, Pete, I can't do 3 or 4 or 5. Well, what happens if you do start with one and it just so happens to be a leveraged habit, a leveraged activity? Well, what happens is you're going to build some momentum. And you know what? Momentum begets momentum. When you're making meaningful progress, you're positioning yourself to make additional or greater meaningful progress in your life. So I love that. Start with one, build it as a habit, build the momentum, build the progress, and it gives you a better foundation on which you can then add maybe another one. Love that. Great reminder, Jeffrey. Hey, do me a favor. This one, when you'd sent this over, this one, my ears went up a little bit and I was like, wow, this is cool. I asked you the question, hey, if we're having a conversation of excellence as we are, what are 3 things that have to be a part of that conversation? We talked about number 1 is full engagement. Number 2, we just talked about is habits. And then number 3 is zone of genius. What are you talking about here?
Wow. Well, I'm going to tell you a story about this. When you talk about zone of genius, it's that area where all of your natural talents and abilities and aptitudes come into play. And it's in those areas where you take those abilities and you apply them consistently on a daily basis, habits. That's where you're really going to find excellence lives. And it's your zone of genius, as we've talked about. But I was thinking about this conversation coming up. I was reminded of my nephew. He has Downs and in the Special Olympics. And when I started thinking about excellence, I kept coming back to Special Olympics. I just want to think about this for just a second because, in Special Olympics, they focus on what you can do, not what you can't do. Well, guess what? That's a great message for every one of us, right? It's so easy to compare with others and to think, oh, well, I can't do that, or I've never done that before, or that's too scary, or whatever it may be. No, what can you do? What can you do? So when you think about a Special Olympian, in the midst of all the challenges that they may have, they find one area that they can excel in, that they can live in excellence. And I've seen that over and over again, where you see this person that maybe can't really communicate verbally and they're very awkward and whatever, but you throw them into a swimming pool and all of a sudden they turn into Mark Spit. Wow. I mean, who would have known there was a fish living in that body? There's that sense of, everyone is a winner. And I will tell you, just in society, I hate the fact that in kids' sports, everybody gets a trophy, because there are winners and there are losers, and losers don't get trophies in my world. Anyway, that's a whole nother discussion. But the reality is, the oath in Special Olympics is, let me win. But if I can't win, let me be brave in the attempt. Man, how about that as the oath for all of us as leaders? Let me win. Let me have impact. Let me make a difference. Let me drive this company to have the greatest impact and to be the greatest company for people to work for and people to do business with and people to purchase products and services from. Let me win. But if not, let me be brave in the attempt. You know what? That's not settling. That's not settling for second best. That's laying it all on the field. There's nothing left. I bring everything I have to bear. That's the zone of genius. That's where all of our God-given talents, abilities, aptitudes, intuitions, all of it is brought to bear. And I believe when we do that, let me just exchange zone of genius and we'll say zone of excellence. Because I do think they're almost synonymous at that point, that we may look from the outside in and go, oh, that's just brilliant. This guy is a genius. This guy's an expert. This guy's whatever. No, he's exhibiting excellence. She's putting her best foot forward and she's making it happen. She's living in her zone of genius. How powerful is that? I know that a lot of the research on positive psychology, they've tried to find some correlations between success and people being in that zone of genius. The results are mixed, but here's what I know. My experience after working with hundreds and hundreds of leaders across the world is that when they are doing things that are aligned with their aptitudes and their skills and their talents, when they are really engaged and they love what they're doing, it's a part of them. It's a full expression of who they are. I'm telling you, those people are game changers. Those people change the world. Those people have impact that lives long after they're gone. And so living in your zone of genius, that area of natural giftedness, maybe supernatural giftedness, I think that that's really key. And so I just come back to that analogy again with Special Olympics, because it's not a focus on what can't be done and my disability. It's what can I do and what are my special abilities and how do I bring those to bear? How do I align what I'm up to in my life so that I'm spending more of my time doing what I'm best at, because I'll always achieve more, have more success, have more impact when I'm in that area.
Wow, there's so much there to unpack. This story about the Special Olympics, obviously I knew what the Special Olympics are, wasn't as clear on the maxims, some of which you've shared, but the idea around, let's not focus on what we can't do. Let's focus on what we can and do it well. What's interesting, the idea of strengths and weaknesses, right? And what I find fascinating is you could read some pretty amazing articles, some pretty amazing books that will tell you, hey, if you've got weaknesses, you got to go about taking care of them. You got to strengthen those weaknesses. You got to figure out how they're not, tripping you up anymore. And you got to go to work. And obviously I'm giving you the cliff notes of it, but there are books, there's articles, there's thought leaders who make really compelling points to that end. There are also amazing books and thought leaders and articles that make a compelling point to say, hey, forget about the weaknesses. Understand what are your strengths. Understand what are your aptitudes. What are your abilities? Where's your skill set? What is your zone of genius? And focus on that with everything that you have without going sort of too far down that rabbit hole, right? The Special Olympics here, clearly you can see sort of what philosophy they have in that debate, if you will. In this case, some of these kids, they can't sort of work on weaknesses, so to speak, right? So it's such an amazing maxim and it's such an amazing reminder to hey, focus on what you can do and do it with everything you've got and do it well. I love that. My question for you now, I think naturally, is how? Like, how do you figure out what is my zone of genius? What should I be spending more time on? And how do you start to build that into more of your day-to-day? Do you have any ideas on that?
I do. And actually, it's easier than what most people think. And I'd say the first place to start is start with your inner circle of friends and have a conversation with them and ask them, tell me when you've seen me at my best. Tell me when you've seen me perform at my highest levels. You'll start to get ideas and clues, if you will, right? Because you need to follow the trail of clues and to discover what you're looking for. And then talk to employers, talk to coworkers, and expand that a little bit further out. Go back and think of all the different positions that you've held and the people that you've worked with. When was it that they expressed appreciation or awe even of something that you were able to accomplish? So look at all your body of work, your accomplishments, and you'll start to see some patterns emerge. In addition to that, I think once you understand those patterns, there's assessments that you can use. There's other tools there that can help you even gain more clarity around that. Obviously, I'm a firm believer that having a coach or a mentor is key. We know that if you want to accelerate your progress, I think it's to about 60%, you need to have someone that's going to hold you accountable. You tell them what you're up to and here's what I'm working on. But we know that if you have an accountability partner, if you have that coach or mentor, your likelihood of success goes up to above 90%. Well, who doesn't want to set themselves up that way? And I just bring that up to say sometimes you need that trained coach or mentor to come alongside to even help you flesh that out. Because once you discover your talents, abilities, and aptitudes, I believe it's incumbent upon you to then practice and perfect and to nurture those, I think, as far as possible, right? Because that's where you're going to have the greatest impact. I think it's important that the focus goes there and the energy goes to say, okay, if this is what I'm naturally good at, if I put energy and focus and intention behind it, how much further can I go with those? But I think it really starts with asking the questions, having the conversations, inner circle, a little bit further out with some coworkers you can trust. Then look at all of your experience in the past. Where have those wins come? Those things where you've really moved the needle or changed the situation. All of those are keys or indicators as to what that talent, ability, skill is. Now, some people say, well, can I be excellent in areas that are not my natural giftedness? I think you can be great. I'm not sure you can be excellent. I think excellence, you have to be in your zone of genius to really achieve those levels, those high levels of being. Someone that we would really say, wow, they're at the top of their game. They really are excellent at what they do. And so, again, a lot of people are good. A few people are great. Even fewer move into that realm of excellence or genius, if we were going to talk about zone of genius. But it's there for all of us. And back to the Special Olympics analogy, I don't want this to sound like it's easy because it still is work. It still takes focus. It takes time. Everything doesn't come easy. I remember talking with my nephew, and he knew of another Special Olympian that practiced holding their breath for 1 year. And it took them 1 year to actually get to where they could go underwater for 3 seconds. Okay, what kind of commitment does that take to go to the pool several times a week and keep practicing putting your head underwater to where you could just hold your breath for 3 seconds? I don't think I have that level of commitment inside me. And yet that happened. That same young man practiced and practiced and practiced. So once they were able to put their head in the water, it took them another year before they were able to swim 10 meters. Another year. So just think about that level of commitment. But that same young man went on to win gold medals in the National Special Olympics, but it was many years later. But think about it, it took a year just to hold their breath for 3 seconds. Do you have that level of commitment? It's there and it's available to us. And see, when we're talking about natural abilities, that we found out that kid, he was a fish, right? He could really swim, but it took a while to develop that. And he was just focusing on what he can do, not what he can't do.
It's amazing the interconnectedness, and this happened in the conversation I had last week, this conversation of excellence. It's amazing. The individual I spoke with last week, he shared 1, 2, 3, and all of which were just so connected. And when you talk about something as dynamic, something as aspirational as this idea of excellence, not good, very good, or even great, we're talking excellence, it's going to take a lot, right? It's not for the faint of heart. And here's the deal. I'd imagine that if you're watching or listening to today's conversation of excellence, you are an individual of excellence. You're aspiring to create greater excellence in your life. And if you're aspiring to create greater excellence, you have to be a student. You can never stay static, right? You have to be absorbing. So whatever your go-to is, whether it's podcasts or videos, for me, it's reading, okay? Whatever your go-to is, if you're aspiring for excellence, you have to be a student. In your being a student, you're going to come across, Jeffrey nailed it on the head, you're going to come across questions that when you read them for the first time, you're like, whoa, right? Your antenna's going to go up and you're like, that's an amazing question. That's a deep question. That's a powerful question. That's a thought-provoking question. I tell my clients all the time, become a question collector. If you see or hear or read a great question, write it down, and don't only write it down, but spend some time reflecting and thinking and answering and responding to this question. I can't tell you how many of these books that I have that are completely filled. And what I do in these books, what do? I ideate. So for instance, if Jeffrey were to ask me a great question, we're having a conversation, I'll give him my response, sure. But if it's a great question, I want to spend some time. I want to internalize that and really spend some time with these questions, because all of a sudden you start to unearth things in yourself that you didn't even know were there, because no one really ever asked you that question to help you discover that, or you never gave yourself the space or the time to discover it for yourself. So again, if you're listening, if you're reading, if you're hearing, become a question gatherer and collector, because I think you spending time with great questions is going to help you to get clearer and clearer on yourself, your own level of self-awareness, but certainly what constitutes your zone of genius. What do you love? What are you most passionate about? What do you do better than most? And as you start to sort of kind of, mesh these ideates together, you start to get clearer and clearer and come to something that will be really significant and meaningful to you in your life.
Yeah.
Jeffrey, any closing thoughts on what we're talking about here relative to your zone of genius?
Well, one last thing on excellence is that it really is the process. It's a continual state of improvement and growth, right? There's no end to this. As excellent as I may be today, I have an opportunity tomorrow to take that to the next level and the next level. And so for me, there is no retirement. I'm not checking out at any point. My goal is to continually hone my craft, my skills, my talents, so that I can continue to have greater levels of impact. And so ultimately, we don't have to beat ourselves up. If you have given your best, if you left it all on the field today, you really can put your head on the pillow at night and say, today was an excellent day. Are you always going to have the wins? Are you always going to have the feel goods? Are you always going to get to spend the day doing what you love? No, it doesn't happen that way. But when you know that you did your very best, and I know that may sound cliche, but there's a peace that comes from that. And it's a peace that I wish for every leader that I work with, because so many of them can be tormented and always asking what if and if only, and I have to do this and I have to do that. How about you just do the things you want to do? How about you do the things you're great at and find someone else that can do those other things that are on your list that you need to get done? Hey, delegate, eliminate, automate, just get them out of your life somehow so that you get to do what you're very best at. And quite frankly, that's where you're going to find your greatest satisfaction, your greatest success. At the end of the day, I think you really end up loving yourself.
Real quick, I don't mean to interject. I have to, because what you just said teed it up perfectly. Speaking with a client recently, and he was talking about, Pete, I don't feel like I'm living with purpose. That P word. Everybody talks about living with purpose. And it can be challenging, right? To even figure out what your purpose is, let alone live with purpose. But I started asking him questions just to get clear on what does he love? What really gets him excited? Some of the things that Jeffrey and I have been talking about for the last few minutes. And he started getting clearer and clearer on that. And I said, listen, right now, none of that is featured in your day to day. Now, am I going to suggest that he jump ship and just, what do they say? Jump off a cliff and figure out how to build a parachute on the way down? No, I'm not. That's not my MO. But here's what I would say. And here's where Jeffrey sort of set this up. I say, listen, you have to do what you love. And if you can't do it full time and for the money, then you have to do it part-time and for the love. Because the moment we're disconnected or we lose connection with that which we're most passionate about and that which we love, life just starts to feel a little mundane. It starts to lose its pop and zest. And sure enough, it's a very personal example for me as well, because I wasn't able to just jump into what I'm doing now with both feet. And I love what I do. I thank God every day for the ability to do this. But once I got clearer and clearer on what it is that I love, I stayed as connected to that as I possibly could. I made time for it. I built pockets. And people think, well, if I can't do it full time or I can't do it for a living, then I can't do it at all. And we overlook what Jeffrey said before. Start with one. Start with a minute. Start with a 10-minute block. Start with a half-hour block. Start with what you've got. Stay connected with what you love. And in doing so, you're going to build a level of momentum and progress that will set you up for your next steps. You don't have to determine what those steps look like now, but by God, don't ever lose connection with what you love. And Jeffrey, I think you set that up absolutely perfectly. Jeffrey talked about three things today. He talked about full engagement, resource, The Power of Full Engagement. Fantastic book. Jeffrey talked about habits, resource, Atomic Habits. Phenomenal book. Jeffrey talked about Zone of Genius, The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. I just read this book. It has been absolutely fantastic. It has been eye-opening. And as a matter of fact, part of the big leap, the idea is taking that big leap into your zone of genius. We get to a comfort zone. We're doing quite well. And the pull is to stay there because it's familiar, it's comfortable, we're doing well. This book is all about how do you transcend that? How do you take that big leap into your zone of genius? The author does a really, really nice job of helping with that. So I would absolutely recommend, if this idea of zone of genius is pulling on you a little bit, I would recommend exploring that with The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. Jeffrey, this has been so much fun. I love you like a brother. You know that. Always have fun speaking with you and just sharing ideas and insights. Usually it's one-to-one, but now we have an opportunity to share it with some other folks who might be listening today. If you've loved Jeffrey as much as I do and you want to either connect with him or learn more about what he does, Jeffrey, share with the folks today. How can they reach out to you? How can they connect with you?
Yeah, best way to do that is go hit my website and you'll see a button there that will allow you to connect with me and set up a time for us to have a discussion and see if we might be a fit to take you into your zone of genius and to be fully engaged in your own personal and professional excellence. My website is beyondexpert.biz, beyondexpert.biz, and that's the best place to get in touch.
Beyondexpert.biz, my good friend Jeffrey Watts. Hopefully now your good friend as well. Jeffrey, I really appreciate you taking the time today and rapping with us and sharing with us your ideas on excellence. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thanks, Pete. Blessings.